Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about immigration to Africa that's more recent than the Chinese, and that's the Portuguese migration to Angola. And I first got the idea to this project in July 2012 when I was in Lisbon, and I passed by the Angolan consulate in Lisbon. And it was very hot, and I saw a long, long queue of white people with passports in their hand, praying to God that the consulate would give them a work permit. And I thought, this is a new world, and this is very interesting. So this is a new kind of postcolonial migration, and basically the Portuguese are in Angola because they are seeking improved living conditions. And the structural background, the economic background to this is the very strong oil-fueled growth in Angola and the protracted economic crisis in Portugal. And in 2013, the remittances from Angola were 22 times the size of transfers in the opposite direction. So this says also something about a new and changing world. There are no reliable statistics on how many Portuguese there are in Angola, but we think there are maybe between 100,000 and 150,000 people, based on different sources. And this is an extremely short background on the Portugal-Angolan relations. Angola was for 500 years a Portuguese colony until 1975. There was a war after that, civil war in Angola. After the decolonization war, there was a civil war that ended in 2002. And after that, the MPLA government started a very comprehensive infrastructure reconstruction program, and a lot of Portuguese construction companies came to Angola and brought workers. The economic crisis in Portugal in 2008 meant that a lot of young, highly educated people started going to Angola. And mainly it was the construction sector and the financial services that were especially hard hit by this crisis. Angola is run by the MPLA party. They have been in power since 1975, and José Eduardo dos Santos has been the president since 1979. So after Equatorial Guinea, he is the most long-lived African president. And the MPLA party has a very strong grip on Angola. There have been democratic elections, but the MPLA have won them have been the winners, and for 3 times in these elections. And the last part of this, the development of the relations between Portugal and Angola, is the decrease in oil prices in 2015, which means that the Portuguese migrants can't send home remittances anymore. It's very difficult because there are no hard currency. There is a lack of dollars in Angola. And it also means that many companies are not paying their salaries. So the Portuguese are now looking for other places to go. And I'm an anthropologist. And when I presented this at the seminar, people looked at me and said, "Oh, you're doing salvage anthropology now." so the Portuguese some of them might really, salvage anthropology is, this what people did before on disappearing tribes and so on. But some of the Portuguese are actually moving away from Angola right now. The Portuguese have a very ambiguous position. They have, of course, the symbolic power as ex-colonizers, but they are very dependent on the Angolan authorities and business owners. The absolute elite, they are very much protected by the president's office, and some are well paid and have management positions. But the non-elite Portuguese migrants feel often very vulnerable in relation to Angolan authorities and to the powerful political elite. And many are working without a work permit, so they live in fear of the police. And the price, at least in 2014, the price for buying a work permit was $13,000, a 3-year work permit. That means the bribe you had to pay. So it's really very expensive to to buy these or to pay bribes in order to get these kind of permits. And there are also undocumented Portuguese migrants living in fear of the police. They live in a terrible situation. And one question we can think, or I'm thinking of, is how to conceptualize these migrants. Are they returnees? Are they labor migrants? Are they expats? Are they colonizers? Are they everything or nothing of this? I will return to that question a bit later. The empirical question I'm asking in this paper is about the Portuguese contributions in terms of social and human capital, and how the Portuguese understand the role in relation to development in Angola, and how do they experience and navigate around the changing power relations, and how do the Angolans working together with Portuguese understand the Portuguese contributions to development. And I'm focusing on relations at workplaces, so I interviewed Portuguese and Angolans that work together. But yeah. And I have been, for this paper, I'm been a bit inspired by the return development nexus, because this research attends, as you all know, to the transfer of human and social capital from north to south. And also in the return development research, capital, or at least in policy, capital gained in the north is seen as having a superior value. And migrants returning to the south are in policy seen as some kind of new developers. And can this line of thought be transferred to the Portuguese migrants is also a question I think we can ask. And I'm also inspired by postcolonial studies, and I think we are making some contributions with this study to the postcolonial studies, because these studies often tend to focus on former colonial powers, whereas we focus on former colony. They focus mainly on British postcolonialism, and we focus on the Portuguese. And we also try to integrate the ex-colonizers and the ex-colonized into a common analysis. So we look at the relationships between the ex-colonizer and the ex-colonized. And we see the limits of the colonial. We see, are these people actually moving beyond the colonial? Is something happen? Is everything still dominated by the colonial relations in terms of identities or powers, or are things happening beyond the colonial, so to say? And I also focus on recent processes with altered economic and political power relations. I'm also inspired by Portuguese postcolonial studies, and they underline that Portugal was a subaltern empire and for long periods of time very dependent on the UK, as you might know, and Portugal has also had a long history of immigration. And in Portuguese postcolonial studies, many analyze and discuss Lusitropicalismo, or the Lusitropical ideology, which was the fascist Salazar regime's idea that the Portuguese have an inherent propensity for mixing, and this means that the Portuguese colonial rule was able to create harmonious creolized social formations. And as you will see, this idea still lives on among the Portuguese migrants, but in other forms. Okay, I worked in Luanda actually between 88 and 99. It was my first professional job. I worked for Swedish Development Agency there, so I have a long-term experience from the country, although I wasn't there for 22 years. And now I've carried out 61 ethnographic interviews, 29 with Angolans and 32 with Portuguese, and these quotation marks are there because many people have mixed identities. It's not so easy to say who is an Angolan and who is a Portuguese. And an especially interesting group are the adult children of the retornados. And the retornados were the Portuguese colonizers living in Angola and Mozambique, moving back, or fleeing back, as some of them say, to Portugal 1975. More than 300,000 people went back, nearly from 1 month to another. And many of those I've met in Luanda today are the children, today middle-aged children of these retornados. And they, of course, have a very mixed and very interesting relationship to Angola, which I don't have the time to go into details here, but we are writing about that as well. And 2/3 of those I met are highly educated, both the Angolans and the Portuguese. So, human capital, work ethos, and experience. It was interesting and surprising to me to see that the Portuguese did not so much talk about professional expertise and so on. They brought up generic attitudes, values, and practices. They talked about the work ethos, that they come early to work, they go late back home, and compared with Angolans, of course. And they talked about their organizational skills and rational thinking. And sometimes they explain these differences by criticizing the Angolan educational system, which has a rumor of being very bad, and it is really very bad. But sometimes, or often, they also relied on colonial constructions of Africans avoiding hard work and being irrational in need of education and modernity. You maybe recognize these kind of ideas. And this is a very typical quotation which you can read. This is a very well-phrased person, but I would say this quote is quite typical for what I met. And Angolans, on their side, when they talked about the human capital of the Portuguese, they were much more ambiguous. Okay, they talked on one hand about the need for experienced professionals in Angola. And they also said sometimes that we Angolans, we are too relaxed. So they also focused, interestingly enough, on work ethos. But then they also said the Portuguese do nothing. They only complain about us not working. And they also very often underlined that Portuguese do not understand Angolan reality. And in conclusion, in relation to human capital, the Angolans had, as I said, quite positive, the Angolans had quite on a general level, positive ideas about the professional experience of the Portuguese. And this was also often a critique of lack of sustainable development in Angola. They said, well, the Portuguese are much better because our government doesn't provide us with good education. And they often talked about negative experience of Portuguese they worked with. And they linked this to inequality, the Portuguese being paid much more, being confrontative, being arrogant, and so on. So they, in conclusion, as one person said, we need labor from Portugal, but we resent it. The Portuguese depended, in terms of social capital, the Portuguese depended very much on pre-migration social capital accumulated in Portugal, which means that they tried to bring in people they know, relatives, friends, and so on, working in the same companies, and which led to the Angolans arguing that it was hard for them to enter and advance on the labor market because the Portuguese took all the good positions. And this TAP is the most efficient university in the world. This I heard many times from Angolans. And what they meant when they said this was that TAP is the Portuguese air company, that when somebody board in Lisbon, they only have a high school degree, but when they disembark in Luanda, they suddenly have a university exam. so this was the way the Angolans joked about the Portuguese. And of course, the Angolans, the Portuguese felt that they were lacking Angolan social and cultural capital, so they navigated this by modifying their accents and using Angolan expressions. They were overtly friendly. They displayed reverence and obedience in front of Angolan decision makers. And returning now to the Lusitropicalism or the Lusitropical ideology, they always, or many people, underlined the Portuguese capacity of mixing, saying that we are good at mixing, we are good at mingle, in difference to the British, for instance, who are not good at mixing with others. So, in conclusion, what kind of migrants are we talking about? I was toying with the idea of calling them post-colonial second-generation returnees. I'm not sure if this is the right, from their perspective, from the Portuguese perspective, I would say that they see themselves as post-colonial second-generation returnees. Maybe the Angolans don't. Maybe we should just call them labor migrants. I think it's quite interesting and fascinating. I will continue to work on this to try to see what kind of conceptualizations we can do. And in terms of contributions to development, so the Portuguese see themselves as essential for development in Angola, as do many of Africa's return migrants. So that's one reason for comparing them with return migrants. But in difference to many returnees, they have a quite low commitment, moral commitment to development in Angola. They are in Angola for earning money. They are not in Angola for developing the country. That's quite clear. And they lack local cultural and social capital, which some true returnees, so to say, in Africa have, or in other places as well. And the Angolans, as I said, are ambivalent to the Portuguese contribution to development. And this is, And in terms of power then, one conclusion is that the power relations are contested and unstable at many different levels. The Portuguese, in terms of economy, they are dependent on the employers and they're depending on Angolan authorities. But on the other hand, colonial imaginaries are still very much at play. And the Portuguese, at least the Portuguese, see themselves that they are better educated, they speak proper Portuguese, they have a more civilized lifestyle and so on. So, and also understanding of contribution to development is an arena of contestation. And in the last minute I have, I just want to put a little postscriptum to what I've said. Because if we look at the relations between the Angolan MPLA party state and the Portuguese companies, and especially the Portuguese construction companies, then we can see that there is a perfect fit. This building looking like, I think it looks like a mixture of the White House and the cupcake. It is the new Angolan parliament built by a Portuguese construction company. And the MPLA party state, they tried to project development through the built environment. To them, development is progress, modernity, and prosperity. And at this level, there is a very good understanding between the Portuguese construction companies and Angolan authorities in terms of handling corruption, for instance, in terms of working together. They really fit well together. But the local opinion on this kind of built environment, and the government called Luanda Novo Dubai, the new Dubai, and the local people say, "Så para inglês ver," and that means it's only for the English to see. And that is a very commonly used Portuguese expression, meaning that when you do something that is just a facade and there is nothing behind it. So that's the way, and this goes back to Portuguese-English relations in the 19th century. So the local opinion on this kind of fit between the Portuguese construction companies and the MPLA party state is that this is a perverted development benefiting local oligarchs and foreign economic interests. Thank you.